Hello and welcome to episode 15 of Monster Kid Radio. I am Derek M. Cook, your host and producer, and this week I'm going back in time to the very first recording session that I did for Monster Kid Radio. Before I launched the show, I built up a library, a collection of recordings with various people that I wanted to use in the show. In fact, all of the recordings that you've heard here on the show, with the exception of the first 2 weeks of episodes here, are all recordings that I've done previously. All the interviews, all the chats. This is the very first chat that I recorded with fellow podcaster and fellow Indiana Jones fan, Joe Stuber. This was the very first time I'd actually chatted with him in person, and he could not have thought of a better topic outside of Indiana Jones to talk about, and that was the movie Abbott and Costello Meet Frankenstein. I told you last week we were getting back to the monsters here on Monster Kid Radio, and you would have a really hard time to find a better movie than Abbott and Costello Meet Frankenstein to do that, because you got Dracula, you got the Wolfman, you got Frankenstein, and technically you got the Invisible Man, so, I mean, it's a great film, and I'm so grateful that Joe brought it to the table here at Monster Kid Radio. Now, Joe is involved with the IndyCast, which is the world's premier Indiana Jones podcast. You can find that over at theindycast.com. He and Keith Voss produce a segment for the show called The Further Adventures of Indiana Jones, which is a segment all about the old comic books that Marvel Comics did back in the 80s following, well, The Further Adventures of Indiana Jones. So you can check that out over at the IndyCast. It's also available on iTunes, and they have Facebook pages for both the IndyCast and The Further Adventures. You know who else is on Facebook? The Retroactive Gamma Rays, who provided the song Avast Ye for the opening of this show. You'll hear that song in its entirety at the end of this episode, and you can check it out on their album, Activate. Not only are the Retroactive Gamma Rays on Facebook, they're also over at Reverb Nation. You can also buy their music on iTunes, Amazon, wherever you buy their album. Just let them know that Monster Kid Radio sent you. I'd like to welcome to the show a voice that you might hear if you listen to the IndyCast. He's one of the guys behind the Further Adventures of Indiana Jones, a segment on the IndyCast where he talks about comic books. Well, he's going to talk about comics and monsters when we talk about our film today. I've got Joe Stuber here on the line. How you doing, Joe?
I'm fine. Thank you very much for having me. I had this first episode.
Yeah, this is the first recording that we're doing for Monster Kid Radio. I'm excited. I've never recorded with Joe, so we're going to see what happens.
It's an honor and a privilege. Thank you so much for this. Is really cool. So I get a little bit of different side from Indy. Yeah, as you mentioned, comics, two of the best. My absolute favorite, Abbott and Costello, we're going to be talking about today.
Are you big fans of Abbott and Costello going back, or
probably next to Jerry Seinfeld, the biggest Abbott and Costello fan?
Wow!
I think when we were talking or just sort of emailing off air, just going through, and you kind of asked the first time I remember seeing these things. I'm telling you, it's just burned into my brain. They used to run Abbott and Costello films on WPGH TV out of Pittsburgh, Channel 53 out of Pittsburgh, on Sunday mornings, and I would remember being, at my grandparents' house. And my uncle was there, and we would just always, every Sunday morning, we'd just watch Abbott and Costello movies. And these things just sort of burned into my brain, and they were the funniest things ever. And I was just like a little kid, so probably half the jokes were flying over my head anyway. It's kind of like Looney Tunes, where it's just, you know it's funny, but half the stuff you don't know why it's funny. You just know it's funny.
Right.
But these things were amazing, and that just opened my comedy brain up. I just, this is what funny is, and that's what defined funny, that and Looney Tunes. And it was like, okay, that's what comedy is. And what better way to get than Abbott and Costello and Looney Tunes.
Now, so this was not the first Abbott and Costello film you had seen?
No, I can't recall what the first one I had seen was. I mean, they just all kind of ran together, but I remember specifically liking the monster-driven ones. They had done a bunch of them. They had done a lot of, obviously they had started in burlesque and those routines, who's on first, and all these different things were coming in. And their early movies had sort of been defined by that. It was just a lot of routines strung together with thin plots. I mean, granted, when you watch some of these things, some of them had a little bit more plots than others. But this one was the one that sort of took them into a different direction. And you obviously have the two. We're talking about Abbott and Costello Meet Frankenstein, but this was sort of the one that took the two main Universal franchises and brought them together, and then it sort of took their career in a different direction. So I remember a lot of these ones, like Abbott and Costello, the Meat movies, Meet Boris Karloff, Meet the Killer Boris Karloff, and Invisible Man, things like that. But I just remember that sort of dark aspect to it. And I really enjoyed these films, but this one in particular. It's not only my favorite Abbott and Costello movie, but it's probably my favorite comedy of all time, and it's one of my absolute favorite movies of all time.
Wow. Well, I enjoy it quite a bit. That's great. I've actually had a chance to see this recently on the big screen this past Halloween. A local theater here was showing it for $1.
Yeah,
so I had to go, man.
I missed them. I caught Frankenstein and Bride of Frankenstein, the AMC.
Yeah.
Or I'm sorry, was it the Turner Classic?
I think it was Turner.
Turner Classic did those, so we caught those on the big screen for the first time, and I missed the Abbott and Costello Meet Frankenstein, but that was there too. But boy, that's perfect that you get to see. That's awesome. I'm a little jealous.
We had a nice group of people there, a nice cross section. It wasn't just like film nerds or older people or whatever. It was a nice mix of people, and everybody loved it. Just had fun with it. Everybody laughed at all the same jokes. It was great.
It's just the best. I mean, you can't watch that movie and just not thoroughly enjoy it.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Now, you talked a little bit about how it changed their career, kind of changed their styling of the kind of movies they would make. This was a movie that Abbott and Costello came to as things were kind of starting to die off for them a little bit. They were kind of falling off the top of the comedy list, I suppose, or not really hitting the same marks they were making before, and then they went and did this movie, and it kind of spun their career off into a totally different direction. It was the first meat movie for them, and it, in my opinion, I've not seen them all, but in my opinion, it's the best one of the batch.
Oh, yeah. I mean, far and away the best. They're all great. But far and away, this one, I mean, you've got all the monsters. So, I mean, just from the scope, it just makes it that. But yeah, you're right. I mean, they were coming out of a very bad time. I mean, this was, Lou Costello had dealt with health issues. He very severe health issues. He was also dealing with the death of his infant son. They were coming out. They had financial problems, tax issues, liabilities. They were always rumored to be breaking up at this point. So I think they'd actually even taken a break up until this point. And even coming in with a script, Lou hated it. I mean, Lou thought it was. He stormed in and said, "My daughter could write something better than this." So they were not happy to make this film. It very much could have been the end of Abbott and Costello, and instead it just rejuvenated the team. And so even on that aspect, I appreciate it. It's just such a fantastic point in their career, and it really took them to a new level. I mean, you look at it, just there's one routine in it from a previous movie, The Moving Candle. But all the burlesque routines are gone. This is just a straightforward script.
And they would return to that moving candle sequence or routine in, I believe it was Meet the Mummy. They would do a similar thing to that. But for the most part, this is just a straight up, it's a comedy. It's got its horror moments because we've got the monsters. But yeah, I mean, it's just a straight up comedy film, and it's not just set up joke. There's an actual story and a pretty involving plot, and a lot of nods to what Universal had done with their monster movies up to this point as well. I mean, you've got Lon Chaney, you've got Bela Lugosi, you've got Glenn Strange, who played the monster, 2 times prior?
Yes. Yeah, I think Karloff had kind of bailed after the third one, and even he said, I'm not watching this one, because he thought they were going to spoof it. Although he did some publicity for it. There's shots, there's pictures of him pointing at the poster, and he did some publicity for it. But yeah, Strange, great horror name too, by the way. So what better way to bring in the monster? But he had done that, and yeah, you're right. I mean, I think what helps define this movie too is the fact that it takes the monsters seriously. It doesn't spoof them like Young Frankenstein did. It basically puts Abbott and Costello in their world, not the other way around. It doesn't put the monsters in Abbott and Costello's world. And I think that's the secret to this movie, is that they are treated with respect, and they are terrifying. But then you throw Costello into it, who's got the best horror takes. I mean, I think that when he's terrified, and obviously when they started doing the monster movies after this, you get more of that. But, I mean, that really sells it. And that was one thing that Lugosi had a concern with, because he hadn't played, that was the other thing I found out, was you think he plays Dracula a lot, but he's only ever played him twice. He's played vampires, but he only ever played Dracula and in this one.
Yeah, on the screen, he only did Dracula twice as a feature. There's also a short, Betty Boop short, where he plays Dracula for Universal once. Wow. But that's it. For Universal, this is the only time outside of the original film where he donned the cape and played Dracula.
Yeah. So he was kind of concerned that they wouldn't treat it with respect, and then he read the script and saw, he's like, oh, okay, well, I'm basically just on the set to scare these guys, which I can do, and it preserves the legacy. So he was okay with it. It was interesting, too, because they get Abbott and Costello, from what I learned is they always tried to keep the set light because they needed to keep the comedy energy up. Because, there's a lot of downtime in between takes. And so then it's like, okay, action. Okay, now we have to be funny again. So they hired, it was Bobby Barber they hired as a court jester. And he would come out and have like seltzer bottles and pie fights, and they would do all these things on their movies to keep in between the takes, to keep things light. And Lugosi didn't really want to have any part of that during the takes. They would bust up people during the takes too. And he was like, no, I'm a professional. So he didn't like, but in between takes, he would kind of jump in on things, which was kind of cool. But yeah, it was just, and then they obviously stayed away from the pie fights toward Strange because the makeup just took forever.
Right, yeah. And now, the makeup is slightly different in this film than what we had seen in the previous monster films because Pierce isn't around anymore. Mm-hmm. It's now a different kind of makeup. It's foam, latex pieces, and things like that done by Westmore. But I think the makeup holds up just fine.
I think it does, yeah. I mean, it looks great. I mean, I thought some of the transformation scenes are very cool. And again, it just, if you like Universal monsters, and, really, who doesn't, this is a perfect movie. It really treats them with respect, and it actually does more with the monsters than some of the later sequels of the Universal monster movies did. I mean, sometimes the Frankenstein monster wouldn't even be on until the last few minutes, on a slab or something, and be brought in, and, he didn't talk. He's got dialogue in this one, at least a line,
Right.
Yes, master. But I think this film treats that franchise with a little bit more respect than some of the sequels, the proper sequels did.
Now, do you consider this part of the series as part of the franchise?
In a way, yes, and in a way, no. I mean, what I like about it is that it definitely puts Abbott and Costello in their world. So that is a world that was created, and there are elements to that, and it's taken seriously. It's not a spoof. So in that aspect, I do. But they pretty much jettison everything all the continuity that had gone up to it. Because obviously the Wolfman had been cured, and now here he isn't. And it's like now Dracula has the Frankenstein monster. So, I mean, there are some different things that you're like, that doesn't make sense with that sequel or that movie. So in that respect, I like how they were able to just jettison everything and not. Could you imagine if they had to explain all the other previous movies, which all the baggage and the continuity that come in? No, they just get to the funny. So I like that aspect of it. But in a sense, it's kind of a sequel, I think. What do you think?
I do put it in there with the mix. I do put it in with the entire franchise. Yeah, you're right. At the end of House of Dracula, Talbot's been cured of lycanthropy. He's no longer a werewolf, but he gets it back again 3 years later in this film. He also shaved because in House of Dracula, he had that little mustache going on. But I do consider it part of the franchise, part of the series. I have no problem kind of reconciling it all into one big story for me.
Yeah.
So I can consider it part of the series.
And the monsters
no issue with that.
The monsters have gotten together earlier, too. I mean, obviously you mentioned a couple. Frankenstein meets the Wolfman. You've got House of Frankenstein with all three monsters. You've got House of Dracula. Right. So these things had happened before. And interestingly enough, Bud and Lou actually even considered teaming up with the three monsters for a Broadway show that never materialized. So this was, I think, like in the mid-'40s they were talking about. This had been around for a while. So these things have been going on for a while. So, yeah, I think it just all kind of melds together.
Yeah, the idea of bringing them all together has been floating around. You said since the 40s. Now, I don't know too much about that Broadway pitch. Do you know a lot or much more about that?
No, one of the books I was looking up, they had mentioned just that was an idea that they had floated out. I was trying to see the year. It mentions a couple of the different things. It said the monster made a brief gag appearance in Olsen and Johnson's Hell's A-Poppin' in 41. Had a cameo from Ghost Catchers that was cut 1944. It said Bud and Lou themselves had considered teaming up with the monster Dracula and Wolfman for a Broadway show. They discussed the logistics of the makeup with Universal's makeup wizard Jack Pierce in 42. Some exhibitors had successfully teamed Bud and Lou with Universal's Goons in 43 when It Ain't Hay played on double bills with Frankenstein Meets the Wolfman. So they wanted to do something. They just didn't know what it was. And then by the time this rolled around, they even had a script, an original script by the screenwriter who had written some of the Sherlock Holmes in Washington, in particular. And so there was like a whole aspect of taking the microfilm aspect from that movie, and there was an original script where the evil Dr. Fell tried to reanimate the three monsters, and then use the Frankenstein's formula, and then put it on microfilm. And then somehow Abbott and Costello wind up with a microfilm. And then obviously all the chaos ensues in their world of people trying to get the microfilm. And it was weird because it said they had, at the end of the movie, it was like salt and vinegar were used to revive the monster, and baked beans were used to revive the Wolfman. So I don't even know what any of that means.
Yeah, no, I can't even imagine what that would look like or how that would play.
So you've got a weird script, you've got a Broadway show. So obviously everybody had been trying to do something to get all this together. And then obviously the screenwriters, Robert Lees and Frederick Arnaldo, came up with a brilliant script, originally called The Brain of Frankenstein. But it didn't. The name wasn't testing well, so until Abbott and Costello's name were thrown into it, and then people were like, "Oh, yeah, that's funny." So then it was like, "Hey, let's do Abbott and Costello meet Frankenstein." So, but it's funny because they call it that, and then it's the other monsters. So
that's true. Well, it goes back to the whole: is he Frankenstein or Frankenstein's monster? You know, they call him Frankenstein, even though that's not really his name. So, I mean, that kind of gets perpetuated a little bit with the title here. But yeah,
and what is the title, by the way?
Something that's been kind of on the cultural or pop cultural radar for a while, and it was great to see it finally happen as this film. I love this film.
Yeah. Well, what is the title, by the way? Because it's like when you watch the film, it's Bud Abbott, Lou Costello meet Frankenstein. And then it's also referred to, like on the movie posters, as Bud Abbott and Lou Costello meet Frankenstein. But then everybody knows it as Abbott and Costello meet Frankenstein.
Yeah, I was trying to pull up some things just to have on my screen as reference while we record, and the IMDb just calls it Bud Abbott, Lou Costello meet Frankenstein. The Blu-ray that I have, I think, just has Abbott and Costello meet Frankenstein on the cover, although it might have Bud and Lou in very small print. Yeah. So, I mean, everybody knew who Abbott and Costello were at the time, so I think... And I think we can call it Abbott and Costello meet Frankenstein, because I think everybody knows what we're talking about here. Everybody has seen the film, or at least most of the listeners of the show are familiar with the film, or at least know the story.
Yeah. I mean, I always call it Abbott and Costello meet Frankenstein. Yeah, but if you look at the titles proper, what great animated sequence to open it up with, too, by...
Walter Lantz.
Walter Lantz, yeah, from Woody Woodpecker fame. And he also did the Dracula transformations. That too.
I wasn't able to find confirmation of that, but yeah, they've been saying that sequence was uncredited, but most people believe it was Lantz who did that as well.
Yeah, and it kind of looks did you get like an old Kirk Allen Superman vibe? This is the series where he would duck behind a rock and then a cartoon Superman would pop up. So, I mean, but you know what? It's just... Yeah, it's cheesy, but you know what? I watched it again and it was like, I love that. It's so cool. And you get that like creepy bat, like the actual bat, like flying, the wings flapping, and it's cool.
Which is a far cry from the original Dracula, because the original Dracula is so straight, stagey. There's none of this transformation, there's none of that. But I mean, I guess you do see a bat briefly in the first Dracula, but there's none of that kind of that animated feel, like you said, that kind of George Reeves Superman kind of feel. But I still have no problem kind of putting them together as, great bookends for what was this incredible Universal monster franchise.
Yeah.
Starting with Dracula and ending with this one. This one actually was the first film that I saw of the whole set.
Really?
I kind of came to horror movies, and I've talked about this on various podcasts and videos and things. I came to horror movies in a really roundabout, odd way. I wasn't allowed to watch any horror movies growing up. My mom was very church, Bible heavy person. R-rated movies, no, not allowed to watch them. But I did find a collection of little thin orange covered hardback books in the kids section of the library by Crestwood House that covered each of the classic monster movies. And I remember reading about Abbott and Costello meet Frankenstein, as well as all the others in these books. So I kind of knew the stories already, because these books kind of did what Famous Monsters of Filmland would do, or the other film magazines would do, just kind of give you a synopsis of the movie, because back then there wasn't VHS or DVD or whatever. So to kind of share the plot, they had to put them in these books for these magazines, these various publications. So I knew the stories going into them. And then one day, flipping through channels at my best friend's house, over at Bobby's house, came across the opening credit sequence of Abbott and Costello meet Frankenstein. And I knew what it was, because I remember seeing pictures of what I was seeing on the screen in these books. And I made us sit down and we watched it from start to finish.
So that was your first experience with Universal Monsters?
It really was. And I was enthralled by this thing. And I mean, to me, it's kind of the best of everything that Universal had going on, because you've got some of the comedy, you've got the monsters, you've got Lon Chaney Jr. Just, man, that guy looked like he had the weight of the world on him, and it was all weighing him down by the eyelids. He just looked so dragged down, but man. And
they're all taking it seriously. That's the best part, because in between takes they're just cutting it up, but these guys were taking it seriously. And how do you take something in an Abbott and Costello movie seriously? But I think that's what makes it work. is it's so straight and so much drama. So that when things happen to, Lou Costello, who, in this one it's Wilbur. So that we always say Abbott and Costello, but it's, it's Chicken Wilbur.
Right.
Although Costello does slip at one point during the revolving door sequence, and it's very tough to catch. But he's just like rambling in his panic and terror, and you can hear Abbott slip out just very briefly.
Yep. Well, and he was so good at that rambling and that.
Oh.
Chick. I mean, it's just so good. So good.
It just, when you put him in that situation, that's just comedy gold. And you're terrified. And of course, Abbott never sees anything.
No, not at all.
And so you're just like, come on, Abbott, just get back like 1 minute earlier and everything would be fine.
Yep. Yep. And see, and that worked for me too, because when I had seen the movie, I was a younger guy, younger kid. So, I was watching things like Sesame Street, and back then Big Bird was always trying to show his friend Snuffleupagus, but he was always the imaginary friend. So that kind of played off. Wow. I don't know how I just linked Abbott and Costello and Frankenstein to Sesame Street, but I did it.
To Snuffleupagus.
Y'all heard it. That's right.
In one step.
That's right.
No, but that's exactly it, because you're the viewer. You're with them. They're telling it from your perspective. And so your frustration's coming through too, and then all of a sudden, guess what? You're engaged. Mm-hmm. You're not just sitting back watching it. You're engaged because you want that person to come running in. Like halfway through the film, when Abbott finally, he said, "Do you believe me?" It's like the monsters are running around and things are blowing up. Like, "Do you believe me now?" He says, "Yeah, I believe you now."
Yeah.
And I'm just like, why didn't you believe him an hour ago? You could have avoided all this. But by then you're engaged. And that's the thing. That's the mark of a perfect movie, a perfect television show. When you engage the viewer and you forget you're watching a movie, whether it's Sesame Street and you're screaming because Snuffleupagus is right there, or the monster's coming in and you're engaged, and that's a great script.
Mm-hmm. Well, and there's a lot about this script to like. I mean, there's the audience engagement, there's the humor, but it also catches all the viewers up to speed with all the monsters and their various mythologies very quickly. I mean, at this point, I imagine it's 1948. Everybody knows basically the story of Dracula and the Wolfman and Frankenstein's monster. But for those few who might not know the background or the story, we're caught up pretty quickly with how the monsters work. Yeah. And some very smart scripting. I mean, we see Talbot turn into the Wolfman pretty early.
Yeah,
so there's a transformation. So we know the deal there. And when they're in the House of Horrors, there's those two placards that kind of explain what Frankenstein's monster is and what Dracula is.
You get the exposition.
Right there. And it's not this clunky kind of info dump kind of thing. It's just we're setting this up so that you know how these monsters work. Remember, this is how they used to work, and, well, they still do work that way. And, I mean, it's just smart scripting.
Yeah, and you're assuming that those monsters are real because they're put in real life. Now, Abbott doesn't think that, and people think it's crazy, but Costello believes it. And McDougal, regardless of whether he believes it or not, he knows he can make money off these things. So the legends are there. So they put it into that world of, oh, yeah, like you said, everybody assumes that these monsters were real, and now let's go take a look at their remains. But it turns out they're not remains. They are still real.
And speaking of McDougal, I got to mention it because I feel like he's one of the unsung heroes of this movie. I love Frank Ferguson's performance as Mr. McDougal. I would love to go to his House of Horrors.
Yes.
Just to meet him.
He's just his opening scene when he's just like berating Costello, or Wilbur in this case. But he's just like, he's grabbing him and he's yelling at him. And he's just, you could feel, his passion in this, but what a performance. Totally unsung. And he steals, I think, almost every scene he's in.
Oh, definitely. And then later on in the movie, when at the masquerade and he's dressed up as the devil and he's out in the swamps and he gets attacked by the Wolfman.
That's kind of dark.
Yeah.
I'm telling you, people don't, it's Abbott and Costello, it's funny, but it gets dark.
Mm-hmm. And, at this point, do you think McDougal's going to become a werewolf? Did he get bit?
I didn't even think of that. He did. Well, I wasn't sure if he got slashed.
Yeah, they don't really say, but
no, he's just kind of like he's taken out off camera. But he survives. But yeah, that would have been a cool sequel, huh?
Yeah,
Costello meet McDougal.
It definitely would have changed his character.
Yes.
I don't know if it'd be an improvement or not, but
no, but he's so great in it. I think I remember him from the Andy Griffith Show. When he was on there, because I know his face looked familiar, and then I saw that he had done some episodes of the Andy Griffith Show. I'm like, I probably saw him on there as well. But yeah,
he definitely Yeah, he's a great character actor, and I mean, he's like you said, he steals the scene or the screen every time he's on. I mean, he's just fantastic.
He's a perfect foil for Costello because I mean, you've got Abbott, but he's a perfect, and even Lon Chaney, you know, as Talbot is just when he's grabbing, everybody grabs Costello and just shakes him. You know, it's almost like, you know, like some rite of passage when you're on an Abbott and Costello film. Like, you know, if you just get to grab Costello and shake him around a little bit. But
he's very grabbable. You just grab a handful and shake him and yell at him and and then the little finger twitching and all that. Perfect.
And the slap and the fit, you know, it's just fun. And you know, I tell you what, one other thing that sets this perfectly in the Universal monsters pantheon of great movies is the score, pitch perfect score by Frank Skinner. Who had done Son of Frankenstein, Wolfman, Invisible Man Returns. And this score is so good that Universal used it for the subsequent Meat movies, you know, Meet the Killer Boris Karloff and The Invisible Man. They used elements of that score in it. And it's unforgettable. I mean, when you hear it, it's unforgettable.
Definitely. It's iconic. It definitely speaks to that monster rally kind of vibe.
Yeah.
That Universal had been known for up until this point. Universal would a lot of times reuse their soundtracks. I mean, even going back to the very beginning of their monster cycle, you know, Swan Lake appears in both Dracula and The Mummy. So, I mean, Universal would repeat a lot of their music. In this particular case, they did it to great effect because Skinner's score is fantastic. You know, one of my favorite movies, Creature from the Black Lagoon, that music turns up in a ton of stuff, including King Kong versus Godzilla, of all things. So, you know, Universal would repeat their music, but when you got something as good as what Frank Skinner did, I see why.
Yeah, and I think that's what ties all those Abbott and Costello Meat movies together, and why I remember them so vividly as a kid, just because that music kind of ties it. It's almost like a theme, you know, like you know, Indiana Jones has his theme, and Superman has his theme, Star Wars has that theme. So it was almost like this became the Abbott and Costello horror theme that kind of resonates. And I just remember all these movies. I remember those like massive sets. You know, I think it was the cave scene in Boris Karloff. And, you know, just a lot of these great sets that were built, and just that moody darkness, the lighting, the contrast, and then that music just kicks in. And that just left an impression on me as a kid to this day, and that's what I remember.
Speaking of things that we like about Abbott and Costello Meet Frankenstein, what are 2 or 3 of the things about this movie that just draw you to it? Or if you were going to sell this movie to somebody else to get them to sit down to watch it, what are 2 or 3 things about this movie you would use as a selling point?
Wow, good question. Well, I mean, if I can't say Abbott and Costello, and that's already sold, it's like I don't want to talk to that person. You know what I mean? It's like if you don't get Abbott and Costello and you don't want to watch it, you really need to get away from me. So it's just that speaks volumes about a person. But I mean, you've got all the monsters. I mean, that to me is the biggest thing. You brought them all together, but not in a cheesy way. I think that would be the easiest thing to do as a spoof. I love Young Frankenstein. It's one of my favorite movies of all time. But it's done as a spoof. And so I think it would have been easy to do that with this one, and they didn't do it. I think you were able to bring all these monsters together, which they had tried to do before, not as successfully. And I think this one really sells it. But it's that mix of horror comedy. I mean, we've seen that in every decade. Every decade has had their share of horror comedies, but I think this one works better than any of them. So I think that blend of, there is some actual moments of sheer terror in this movie. I mean, you've got Dracula, you know, the biting on the neck of Sandra, and, you know, turning her into a vampire, and you've got, you know, as you mentioned, McDougal getting slashed by the Wolfman. So you've got all these different horror elements. You've got those massive sets, you know, that bring the whole thing to life. And I mean, you watch it, it jumps off the screen. And again, I envy you for being able to see it on the big screen, because that had to look tremendous.
Oh, yeah. It was gorgeous. I mean, Universal's monsters, their films, the set design and the set construction on some of these movies is just fantastic.
Yeah.
I mean, it's epic and it's grandiose and it's like nothing that you see today.
Right. Yeah, I love when he goes into the basement, you know, the huge, massive basement. He's like, what's in there? Broom closet.
Yeah.
He doesn't want to go in there. Costello doesn't. It's a broom closet. I mean, that place is huge. But then even the lab set, and I think one of the Butterloo's kids had talked about, because they used to bring their kids on to the set. They're huge family men. I mean, you know, at a time when, you know, Hollywood stars were, you know, with everyone else. I was like, these guys were like really good family men. And they bring their kids on the set. They didn't want to be apart from their family. And I forget which kid I was reading about, but they said, that those sound effects, and all the crackling and the electricity, that was real, they said. They were really like firing stuff off on the set. And, it's like, you didn't CG, there's obviously special effects and things like that, but they said they had some stuff going on there that they remember vividly.
Right. I mean, there are some optical effects in here. I mean, we mentioned the transformation from Lugosi to Bat. When Lugosi or when Dracula reanimates Frankenstein's monster for the first time, there's the little cartoon lightning bolts that go from his ring to his neck bolts.
Oh, was that his ring?
I thought it was like a ring or some sort of...
like a little device, but that's the other cool thing about this is it doesn't matter. Whatever. It's a plot device, Were you okay with that?
I was okay with it, and I had to remember, because it's been a long time since I've seen like House of Dracula or even House of Frankenstein. I mean, I've got them here. They're collecting dust right now, but I had to remember that in the later Universal Dracula portrayals, he was definitely a vampire, but there's also a lot of the mad scientist kind of creeping into his characterization. Okay. And then, of course, you look at Bela Lugosi, who had been doing some mad scientist roles between Dracula stints. So to bring some of that mad scientist that kind of, he's trying to revive the Frankenstein's monster and control him, I had no problem with that.
Yeah, it just, and again, it gets the plot going. You mentioned it earlier. It's like it gets right to what it needs to get to within a few minutes. So you're off and running. I mean, Costello's screaming already. I mean, you're within the first probably, 10 minutes of the movie maybe 10, 15 minutes of the movie, and he's already screaming and panic. So we're off and running. So yeah, those little plot devices. But yeah, that was a little weird, just the little bolts bringing, and he just like gives him some juice just to get him from point A to point B.
Yeah, just enough to get him moving.
Yeah, so they have to get, and that's what drives the whole plot is Sandra, the girlfriend, who, you just, and again, when you see these Abbott and Costello movies, Costello always gets the great-looking women. And you're just like, well, how does he, well, in this one, there's a little bit, they're using him, obviously, in this one, but there's a great line by Bud in this one, too. It's like, at one point when Sandra's asking, because there's an insurance agent that comes in, a beautiful insurance agent who's protecting McDougal's investment.
Right.
And and then Sandra, the girlfriend, who's the doctor who's trying to get Costello's brain to put into Frankenstein's monster so that he's easily manipulated.
Right.
She says, she sees the beautiful insurance agent. Are you cheating on me? She's wondering. And Abbott just says, and he says, how can you look me in the face and ask me that? Bud says, how can you look him in the face?
Right.
It's just like...
Well, and even at the very beginning of the movie, when we first meet, Sandra, there's an exchange where, he asks her if her head's on, or is your head all right? Because, she's all over Wilbur.
Yes.
It's like, yes. Really, I mean, it's chicks like guys who make him laugh, I guess. I don't know.
Well, then the one thing he says, Bud says, I don't get it. And she looks at him and says, and you never will. Yeah. Like, there's so many lines. There's another selling point. I don't know if those are ad-libbed or scripted. You've got the line, from Lon Chaney, when the moon is full, I'll turn into a wolf. And, Costello says, yeah, you and 20 million other guys.
When I saw that in the theater, everybody just laughed out. I mean, it was a genuine, like, roaring of laughter right at that moment because it's just so perfect.
I don't know if that was in the script or if Costello came up with it, but, it just... There's so many great lines like that, and when you watch it again and again, you pick up all those lines. So, I mean, yeah, that's what sort of sets the plot in motion. So we've got, Sandra, who, that's the whole thing, is that they want Costello's brain, and he even admits, I've had this thing for 30 years, it doesn't work. Like,
yeah.
But they want to put that in so that, Dracula is tired of the monster just going ballistic all the time. He's got this, evil criminal brain in there, he's like, did we ever find out what Dracula wants to use him for?
I don't think so. And I don't know if it's really all that important, but I don't think we really find out.
No. He just wants to be able to manipulate him easier, and he'll be able to do that with Costello's brain in him.
I mean, not to get too meta, but if we look at it as part of the overall franchise, the brain that's in Frankenstein's monster right now, unless something happened, between films, was the brain that was transplanted from Igor into the monster in, I believe, Son of Frankenstein or Ghost of Frankenstein.
Right.
And Igor was played by Bela Lugosi.
Yeah.
So Bela Lugosi as Dracula wants to replace the brain from Igor, as played by Bela Lugosi, with Lou Costello. I don't know if that's an upgrade or not.
Hey, Abbott.
Yeah.
Hey, Master.
Yeah, exactly. Drac.
Yeah, I don't know. Boy, I'm glad it didn't work because that would have been kind of weird.
Yeah,
if
just a little bit.
I did have Costello's brain in it, although it would have made a very cool sequel.
What would you have called it?
Abbott tries to get the search for Costello's brain.
There's something. There you go. Hey, big thanks to Joe for joining me on this week's episode of Monster Kid Radio. I love Abbott and Costello meet Frankenstein, and I can't wait to continue that discussion on the next episode. And remember, I mentioned last week we've got a contest here at Monster Kid Radio to create the very first promo for the show. You guys hear me play promos for various podcasts here on Monster Kid Radio. You listen to other podcasts, you hear other promos. We don't have one for Monster Kid Radio, and I want to give you the opportunity to produce one for us. Now, I included the Monster Kid Radio theme music that we use when we're not having another band play their music on the show in the feed last week. You can find that at monsterkidradio.net or monsterkidradio.libsyn.com. You can download that if you want to use that. You don't have to, but if you do use music that doesn't belong to you, you got to make sure you get permission to use it in the promo because, well, the winning promo will become property of Monster Kid Radio LLC, and we just want to make sure everything's above board. If you win the contest, if you create the best promo for Monster Kid Radio, you will win a brand new, unopened, never watched before copy of White Zombie on Blu-ray. It was recently released by Kino. It looks great. It's got a great commentary track. It's a wonderful film, and I can't wait to give that to one of you guys or gals if you make the best promo. The deadline for the contest is August 11th. If you want to get a hold of us between episodes, you can find us on Facebook by looking up Monster Kid Radio, or you can email us at monsterkidradio@gmail.com, or call and leave a voicemail for us at 503-479-5MKR. Monster Kid Radio is a registered service mark of Monster Kid Radio LLC. All original content of Monster Kid Radio by Monster Kid Radio LLC is licensed under a Creative Commons Attribution Non-Commercial No Variations 3.0 Unported license. Of course, that does not apply to the song Avast G, which is available on the album Activate by the Retroactive Gamma Rays. The song appears here on the show, courtesy of the band. See you next time.